Welcome to Social Justice and Community Engagement, a program that shares the efforts of the Division of Institutional Equity and Diversity at the University of North Texas to facilitate access, equity, and inclusion for the UNT and surrounding Denton community. I am Shani Barracks-Moore, UNT Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and I will be your host for these conversations. The goal of our show is to create awareness about opportunities to engage with our efforts so that the UNT and Denton community can collaborate to create more inclusive and equitable living, learning, and working spaces. Today's show will feature the 2018 UNT Equity and Diversity Conference, sponsored by the Division of Institutional Equity and Diversity. In its 18th year, this conference is themed Access Granted, Building Bridges to Inclusion, and enjoys sponsorship support for the first time from Mayhill Hospital Behavioral Health, GCC Enterprises, Peterbilt Motors, Sally Beauty, and Wells Fargo. We're here on location at our 2018 UNT Equity and Diversity Conference here in the UNT Union. And in our Multicultural Center, we have with us our keynote speaker of our Equity and Diversity Conference, Rosa Clemente. Rosa, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
You did a wonderful job at our keynote, in your keynote speech, and I think we've still got folks tweeting questions for you. So why don't you tell us about some of your areas of focus for social justice and activism and why you've chosen them?
Well, I mean, I think the main crux of my organizing has been around police violence, police brutality, and the freedom of political prisoners, as well as the independence of Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. So I think those main have been, because the organization I have been part of for years, I'm still a supporter of the Malcolm X grassroots movement, which is a chapter-based organization that really has these politics of what is called, the politics of self-determination and self-defense and things like that. So those issues were the issues that made me become an organizer in my community. So those are things that are still part and parcel of any of the work that I do.
Great, great. So the theme of our conference this year is Access Granted, Building Bridges to Inclusion. And as an Afro-Latina, a lot of your identity-based work has really talked about the intersection of those identities and how that can build bridges. And we have a growing multiracial population and a lot of our students who are really beginning to explore the intersection of their identities. So talk to us about the ways in which you've integrated identity intersectionality and its place in social justice work.
Yeah, I'm not a person that, I don't really ride with intersectionality like that. Like, I think it's been really almost watered down and misconstrued to what Kimberly Crenshaw originally, when she created the term, she created, as she says, because she was talking about how the state comes from many different ways to attack particularly Black women. Now it's more based within people's, when they say they have different identities. But I mean, I think as a human being, have different identities.
Sure.
You're born, that way. So politically, for me, I really, again, do work around what I think is Black liberation. So I'm not multiracial. I'm Black Puerto Rican. I racialize myself as Black. My ethnicity is Puerto Rican. And then I particularly work within what we call the politics of Black freedom and Black liberation through a Black radical lens. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of easy to sometimes take things and they'll get watered down so everyone could feel part of it. And I don't necessarily think everyone is part of everything, especially depending on where you are politically. I think it's important that we don't conflate someone's Blackness as they're born and how race is constructed, or Latino-ness or Asian-ness or whiteness, and then make assumptions of where they lie politically.
That's a good point. So you gave a great keynote today, as I mentioned, and really just dropped the mic. I mean, learned so much from what it is you talked about. So share with us what you hope that our audience, some of the main points you hope our audience took from your speech today.
Someone who's been in academia for all my life, as well as done things outside of it, I always think it's important that I speak to young people, and I think I'm able to do that because I really do stay connected with younger generations, whether in the streets, on campuses, behind the walls, in prisons and things like that, and kind of have a feel, I think, for them and popular culture and all these things that I think are important to bring into a space, especially an academic space, because sometimes these spaces it's not that they're too intellectual, is that sometimes people think they can have a lot of rhetoric and a lot of language that is actually oppressive type of language, because everybody can't get down with that, right? Or it's super academic and technical. And that these spaces should always be about particularly turning young people on into being organizers or becoming more politically educated if they're not already, and if they are even becoming more politically educated, so they can engage on their campus as organizers and activists as well, not just students, not just sitting in a classroom and taking in what someone's giving you, but also having the ability to question and debate it. And if you don't like something that's going on your campus, whatever the issue is, that you organize. So, I mean, to me, that's always the overarching message I'm trying to get through, about being authentic, being passionate, being politically educated, doing work outside of just the classroom, like being a real community member of your whatever space you're in.
Okay, great. And as a vice presidential candidate in 2008, you obviously applied some of your social justice work to political pursuits. So in your view, what do you think are some of the emerging issues around the combination of social justice and politics?
Well, I mean, I think we're all political. Electoral politics is different. That's like an actual science, and there's there's a way to deal with who we vote into office, who's supposed to represent us and stuff like that. I don't know where we're at with that in this country. I don't really, my belief is that most of every elected official does not in any way represent what the people want, what they ask for, and what they demand. And now we're in a time period where the person in the White House has espoused white supremacist and white nationalist thought, which has trickled down not to just people in our generation, but younger people, especially younger white men who are feeling, for some reason, under attack in this country, are feeling that no one's talking to them when actually the society always talks to them. And I think that's a huge problem, because at the end, most of these elected officials, all of them, have no idea what's happening in terms of economic inequality and inequity in this country across the board, regardless of race, ethnicity, culture, where you live, right? The economic inequality in this country continues to double almost every 5 years. We will soon have more people living under the poverty line than people out of that. And that is highly problematic, and no one is dealing with that, period. I don't care what party it is, what politician who's been in the White House is going to be in the White House. And I think that's a huge concern for young people. And then I think that's why they often feel like, what's the point? You know, like, why participate in this? You're not listening. So, yeah, you can disengage from electoral politics, but you could still become politically you could still be politically active, and that's the whole point. You don't, like, being politically active doesn't just mean about voting. Okay, if you're into that, you're into that, and you do the work. But if you're not, and then there are some people in this country that legitimately can't vote, their right has been taken away, or they're on their way to becoming a citizen, or some people are like, that's not what I'm going to do, you know, and you can't sway them on the argument of like people died for a right to vote. Well, because that's actually not true. People didn't die for the right to vote. What Black people were doing in the 50s and 60s were demanding equity, and there was a concession or public policy won, but they were still organizing. Even if they hadn't gotten the right to vote, they still would have been organizing their communities. So I think that's always the most important thing, is about organizing the grassroots.
Well, Rosa, that's a really good place to end. Thank you so much
Thank you for having
being
me
here, and we look forward to having you back. We need to invite you back.
Oh, I'll come back.
I think there were a lot of people that loved.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
The Division of Institutional Equity and Diversity at the University of North Texas hosts the Equity and Diversity Conference annually. Planned by the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, which includes the Multicultural Center and the Pride Alliance. The conference brings together students, educators, professionals, and community members to promote topics of equity and inclusion in higher education. The University of North Texas prides itself on diverse student population, administration, and professionals.
Diversity and inclusion topics are always of great interest to me, and so I'm hoping to gain a lot from the different workshops. In fact, I already have.
This is about fighting the systems that's been in place, and that's very important for like students of color or those in marginalized communities in general.
Every interaction I've had with everybody here has motivated me. Everyone came here with the same common goal, and that's to grow and develop. And so everyone having that same mindset coming here and having conversations, I've been able to take something just from simple 2-minute interactions with everybody I've met.
I, like many the world over,
Speakers and presenters will share insightful messages of equity, inclusion, identity, and diversity throughout the conference.
Be more, act more, and learn more.
How do you find balance in authentically kind of being yourself without getting the like label of the, and I'm gonna say it, like angry Black woman?
What's your goal? What's the things that they want? And then match them up. It's not a long-term lasting social justice coalition that'll last forever.
And I think it's important that we show up as students, you know, just to be in this space.
So I feel more than just motivated, but inspired and empowered to really make an impact on the UNT community and the broader Denton, DFW, Texas region.
A well-known writer once said, as an immigrant, you are too foreign for here, you are too foreign for home, you are never enough for both.
With several workshops and showcases, such as the spoken word competition, students are highly encouraged to attend the conference. Share and gain insightful perspectives from professionals and others within the UNT community. For more information about the conference, including sponsorship, vendor, and workshop presentation opportunities, contact the Office of Diversity and Inclusion.
We're back here at the 2018 Equity and Diversity Conference, and we're joined here by our first ever social justice keynote speaker, Dr. D.L. Stewart. Dr. Stewart, welcome to Denton, Texas.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So we're just going to jump into the questions.
Okay.
So some of the breadth of your experience includes advocacy for trans communities. And some of the most basic work around trans equity and justice includes using and understanding the importance of pronouns. For those of us that may be unfamiliar, can you share some of the importance of pronouns and using them correctly?
Sure. And I'll clarify that it's the importance of using the proper pronoun, the appropriate pronoun for the person you're referencing, right? And so we don't use pronouns when we're talking to the person that right? So I wouldn't be speaking to you and use pronouns of reference, right? One of the things that I think is part of the conversation around this issue is how little focus is put on grammar education as we go through school, right? Mm-hmm. And so we forget that we've been using pronouns since we were 2. Right? To reference other people, to reference our parents, to reference siblings, whoever, we've been using pronouns to reference people all of our lives. The issue is that we have been taught to assume, and our pronouns are all gendered, right? For the most part, unless we're talking in the plural. Right. So we've been taught that they, them, or their, so they, the subject of a sentence, them, the object of a sentence, they're the possessive in the sentence, right? We've been taught that that's plural. So we use that when there are groups of people that we're referring to, them over there, right? We've been taught that he, him, his, she, her, hers, that they're gendered pronouns that are evident on the body, right? That gender is apparent on the body. And so we know whether to use she, her, hers, or he, him, his to reference someone based on what we think their gender is, based on what they look like to us, right? And so when we're talking about being trans-cognizant, not just even trans-inclusive, but trans-aware, right, of the reality that there are people in the world who, one, don't identify necessarily within a strict binary of either as a man or as a woman, that there are people for whom their gender is not clearly written on their body. So I heard earlier today someone say, clearly I'm a woman. Well, no, actually, there's nothing clear about that, okay? Because people would assume that I'm clearly a woman and I'm not, okay? And so to disrupt the presumption that we already know someone's gender, we should ask, what is the proper gender pronoun? What are the proper gender pronouns I should use for you, right? As part of the introduction, we ask somebody's name. We don't presume we know someone's name, right? You look like Kimberly. Well, what does that mean, right? Like that, but my name is Shani, right? And so it's the same way with pronouns. Right? Where we would not assume we know someone's name without asking. We should not assume we know someone's pronouns, proper pronouns, without asking, which also means we don't necessarily, should not assume that because we know someone's proper gender pronouns, that we know what their gender is either.
Say more about that.
Sure. So, might say someone, for instance, who's a trans woman, uses she, her pronouns. The fact that you know that she uses she, her pronouns does not tell you that she's a cis woman or a trans woman. You don't know that. Someone who uses she, her pronouns may still identify as non-binary. Okay, a non-binary or genderqueer trans person, but they use quote unquote normative pronouns, right? So we don't know. Right? Knowing the pronouns just means that you are able to properly reference the person you're talking to. Right? Instead of making assumptions about that and ending up dishonoring and really dehumanizing someone,
So it's really affirming their personhood is what you're saying.
Exactly. And so when people refuse to use someone's proper gender pronouns, even after they've been told, it's a sign that you claim that you know more about that person than they do about themselves. It's not affirming their personhood, and it's dehumanizing.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. So your talk today here at the Equity and Diversity Conference, I love the title, is Driving the Getaway Car. Moving from allyship and accomplishment and social justice advocacy. That's a great title. Can you tell us your perspective on the difference between social justice, allyship, advocacy, and accomplishment?
Being an accomplice. Sure. Absolutely. So I think about, and I'll be saying more about this, of course, later, that allyship, people can talk about, I'm an ally, and do absolutely nothing to advance the cause of justice and equity, to disrupt systems and structures of power and privilege. You know, they got a sticker on their door, they got a pin, you know, they got safety pins on their jacket, whatever. And they're not actually doing anything. To be an accomplice means that you engage in the work as assistant to the people who are doing, you know, who are actively involved. So there was a great example of this in the movie Black Panther. And so sorry for spoilers. Sorry, spoiler alert. Turn down your volume, mute something. But the character, the CIA agent, I think Ross, ends up toward the end of the movie, and you know, the great battle scene between Eric, who's often referred to as Killmonger. I refuse to use that name for him because that is a name that was given to him by the colonizers as he was engaged in work for their benefit. So I refuse to call him that. Eric, right? But between the battle between Eric and the Black Panther, T'Challa, King T'Challa, Agent Ross is put to work by Shuri and Nakia to go sit here and do this. We are engaged in this work here. You can assist by doing this, right? So he gets in the plane, you know, and he's like, okay, I see 3, you know, ships that are heading, you know, toward the border. What do I do? Shoot them down, idiot. You know, that's, you know, so it's being willing to listen. What do you need me to do? And then doing that according to the directions of the person you claim to be an accomplice for. You're driving the getaway car. Okay. And so when we think about, you know, even in, you know, our criminal justice system, the accomplice, you may not have been directly involved in the action, the disruption, but you aided and abetted it happening. Right? So you're not center stage. And too often allies can make themselves center stage in movements so that things all revolve around them, are made comfortable for them to be involved, instead of really recognizing the primacy and the appropriateness of the leadership of the people who have designed and created and should be leading that movement. We're not here to make this comfortable for you. Okay, you claim to be here because you recognize that, as I saw, there's a quote of one of the wall banners, I think in the Pride Alliance Center, about, you know, if you think you came here to help me, you wasting your time. But if you're here because you recognize that your liberation is bound up in mine, okay, great, we can do some work together. And so too often allies come in with the assumption that I'm here to help you. You know, so there's a savior missionary complex versus I'm here to work with you, to work alongside you, to do what it is you say you need to do. You're recognizing this is what we need to have happen. Okay. And okay, I can do this part. Right? Under your guidance, under your leadership, under your direction.
And permission.
And permission, exactly. Exactly, right.
Okay, I can't wait to hear more about that.
Sure.
Which we'll have that posted for folks to see the keynote of that too.
Great.
So last question. You also did a workshop for us today titled Navigating Privilege and Marginalization in Building Social Justice Competence, which I really appreciate because privilege is one of those topics that people don't really want to talk about.
No, they don't.
It's sort of the last thing that folks want to talk about.
Sure.
So can you discuss what you shared with participants and how you think they received it?
So what I tried to do, and I think in my work lately that this is the direction I've been going, and usually coming out in my teaching more so than in things that I've written yet. But we often talk about privilege and marginalization as though they were binaries, right? As though they were an either or. You're either privileged or you're marginalized, and that's not real, okay? All of us, well, maybe some of us don't, but the vast majority of us have multiple social categories, social identity group categories in which we have privilege and multiple in which we are marginalized. However, what I have found, even amongst marginalized communities, is an inability and a dismissal of privilege, of their privilege. Okay, and the ways that they can access and are benefited and advantaged by structural systems of power. Okay, And so, for instance, as myself as a Black African American, yes, that's a marginalized identity. I also have a PhD, and I'm a tenured full professor.
It's a lot of privilege.
That's a lot of privilege, right? That privilege does not erase or protect me from the marginalization of my race, because no one knows about my educational and professional status when they see me, right? They think they know some things about that based on their racism, right? In the ways that they intersect classism with that. But so they don't actually know. So there's a lot of racism and anti-Blackness that gets thrown at me every day. And yet, I have means and ways to counteract that or defend myself against that marginalization through the systems of privilege I have access to, right? That if I'm not careful, I could be using to sort of reinforce other systems of marginalization. Right. So when a hotel worker, hotel clerk at the front desk, throws shade my way as I check in, all right, based on their presumptions of race, class, gender, and the intersection of all of that, I could come with an attitude of, I could buy you, in terms of the level of, privilege and social class privilege and educational privilege, I can go there. But that just reproduces and reinforces systems of classism, right? That hotel worker is already subjugated to, right? And so it's about how do we, and particularly in spaces that are supposedly activist and identity-based spaces, recognize the ways in which we still allow systemic privilege and social advantage to corrupt those spaces, right? So when we're in an activist space that's completely inaccessible to people with mobility impairments, right? We're down in the basement and there's no elevator, okay? There's no one has thought about whether or not we need sign language interpreters. No one has thought about the need for to be mindful of sensory impairments that people may come with. No one is thinking about, is this, we're in a space with gendered bathrooms and there's how are we caring for the physical needs of our trans and genderqueer siblings who may be trying to come into this space and are made to feel threatened because no one is thinking about and are erased because at the beginning, brothers and sisters. Well, that don't actually cover everybody in the room, but you're not thinking about that.
Passive exclusion.
Exactly, passive exclusion. And so how do we recognize and seek to disrupt those things that are happening, even in spaces where, yes, our marginalized identities may be being centered? How do we recognize that in that same moment, it's a both and, it's not an either or, right? We can be truly anti-oppressive instead of just pro-Black or pro-queer or whatever. How can we actually be anti-oppressive in the ways that we engage each other and in the ways we set up spaces, right, that we're trying to do activist work in?
That's a wonderful point to end. You've given us so much food for thought. I feel like I need to do a list of further things to look up and continue to think about. So we thank you so much,
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Stewart, for being here with us and
It's
for
a pleasure to
being
be
with us
here
at the conference. And we look forward to hearing your keynote.
Indeed. Thank
All right,
you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks so much for joining us here on location at the 2018 Equity and Diversity Conference. For more information and to get involved next year, visit our website at edo.unt.edu. On behalf of UNT's Division of Institutional Equity and Diversity, we thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.